Today, I'm going to tackle one of the most commented things on YouTube when somebody talks about the clarinet family. What about the octo-contras? Well, today I'm going to tell you the true story of the octo-contra clarinets. A lot of the information that you may know about these instruments is not wholly accurate. First, we're going to go to one of the earliest documents we have concerning the octo-contra clarinets, and that's this book right here, Woodwind Instruments and Their History by Anthony Baines. Baines is a woodwind historian and was really one of the very first people to ever write about woodwind instruments in their history, as the book title suggests. And I'm going to read a short paragraph, and this paragraph is for a lot of people the only source that we had for a lot of years on the octo-contra clarinets. So successful are these contrabass clarinets that it is not surprising to read that a sub-contrabass clarinet, an octave lower still, has been built. A recent example is the Octo-Contra-Bass clarinet by LeBlanc in triple B flat of metal, 5 feet tall and descending far below the piano keyboard down to the bottom of the 32-foot register of the organ, the deepest orchestral or band instrument yet conceived. And by and large, that information is correct. LeBlanc made a single octo-contrabass clarinet in 1935. And it is that year that they came out with the paperclip model contrabass clarinet and a few paperclip model bass clarinets. These were called the Hovignal system, and I am almost 100% positive I butchered the pronunciation of that. And I will put the gentleman's name on screen. It's Charles Hovignal. And see how that's spelled across the bottom of the screen there. He is one of, if not the greatest woodwind acoustician in the 20th century. If you wanted to study woodwind acoustics, you went to Charles Hovignal. Again, I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation on that. He was LeBlanc's chief acoustician, designed the contrabass clarinet as we know them, at least in the paperclip form. And in 1935, Paris was hosting the World's Fair. Now, the World's Fair is not something we see much anymore. Go back to a movie like Iron Man 2 or Captain America, the First Avenger, and you'll see the Stark Expo. If you're a Marvel fan like I am, that's essentially the World's Fair. It was a gathering of people from all over the world to show off new ideas, inventions, cultures, and including musical instruments. And in 1935, it was being housed in Paris. And LeBlanc decided, we're going to wow the world and show them new extreme clarinets. And the biggest one, of course, was their paperclip contrabass clarinet, a contrabass clarinet that didn't have to be played standing up. It's folded over like a bassoon. Well, they decided, well, let's go even more extreme and double it again and have an instrument descending all the way down to the bottom of the pipe organ's register. And so they built a single octo-contrabass clarinet. Now, if you don't know, the term octo just means 8, and it means it's an octave lower than the contrabass clarinet. This is the only time I can document that the term octo-contrabass has ever been used. LeBlanc did a lot of creative branding. They created the term contra-alto, probably in the late 50s or early 60s. And I may do a whole other video on just the term contra-alto because I don't really like it because it's not a good term. But we'll get to that later. But the octo-contrabass clarinet, single one ever built, 1935. That instrument descends to a written low D, which will sound C0. That's the C 1 octave below the piano. It's the bottom C of a 32-foot register of the pipe organ. Incidentally, if you're following Richard Bobo's sub-contrabassoon project, his sub-contrabassoon will go down to the A below that, a minor third lower. There was some dispute among internet articles what the true lowest note is. Some people thought it was a written C, sounding a B-flat -1, but that does not appear to be the case. It does appear that it only went down to the bottom written D, sounding C0. That instrument now resides in a museum in France, and it is currently unplayable. I will talk about the future of that instrument here in a second. Don't get your hopes up. The other instrument is the Octo-Contra-Alto. Now, the Octo-Contra-Alto was conceived at the same time. Two bodies were built. This is, again, contrary to what a lot of internet sources say, that 3 octo-contra-altos exist. That's simply not the case. 2 bodies of instruments were built, but only one ever received keywork. The other was just a tube. Now, the octo-contra-alto was pitched an octave below the contralto. Its body was built in 1935. However, the company did not finish the instrument until about 1971. Not exactly sure. It could have something to do with, that little thing of World War II, where Paris gets invaded and taken over by Nazis. I'm not entirely sure on the details there, but nevertheless, the instrument doesn't get completed until 1971. And it's named at that point the Octo-Contra-Alto. And at that point, the term contralto has been created by LeBlanc. It's unsure what they would have called it in 1935 had it been completed. So that instrument, one gets completed. The other one remains as a simple tube with no keywork. I've seen some photos of that. No one really knows exactly where that instrument is. At least I don't. Someone in France may know. But the information that only one was ever built is really uncommon knowledge. And in fact, yours truly got it wrong in his recent book on woodwind orchestration. I say that 3 were built. And the reason I say that is because every source out there says 3 were built. Come to find out, through secondhand communication from Cyril Mercator, who restored the Octo-Contra-Alto, only 1. And that's it. So, 1 Octo-Contra-Alto, 1 Octo-Contra-Bass. Now, the Octo-Contra-Alto was written down to a low C, which will sound an E-flat 0. That's the E-flat, a tritone below the lowest A on the piano. It's only a minor third above the octo-contrabass as far as the lowest pitch. Now, both of these instruments reside in a museum in France. When the Octo-Contra-Alto was donated to the museum, it was under the condition that the instrument be restored and made playable. The Octo-Contrabass, however, was not donated under that condition and remains in an unrestored state. From communications from people in the know, the museum has decided that they are not going to restore the Octo-Contrabass. Further, both instruments are permanently on display and, in essence, have gone to the museum to die. And as much as I love museums, for artifacts like musical instruments, they are really a repository for instruments to go to die. When the Octo-Contrabass was being fixed up in the final few months before it went to the museum, that's essentially its treatment by the beautician in the morgue. One last look or one last listen before its funeral. And according to what I've been told about the museum, they are not going to let these instruments out. They are never to be played again. And this comes from really reputable sources who were in touch with the museum and in touch with the restorers. And so don't get your hopes up on there being an Octo-Contrabass or Octo-Contra-Alto clarinet revival, and don't go writing for it in your massive band or orchestra pieces, because the instruments have gone away. Sad as it may be, the only thing that ever goes to a museum to live again is, of course, dinosaurs. But musical instruments go to the museum to retire and to die. So that's a lot of the history of the Octo-Contra-Alto and the Octo-Contra-Bass clarinet. I will say one other thing. I have heard a rumor, unsubstantiated, that someone, somewhere, is actually attempting to build a new one. I can neither confirm nor deny that this is happening, but I will say that it was a fairly credible rumor. However, take that with a grain of salt, because it is still a rumor and I have no concrete evidence one way or the other. But the Octo-Contra-Alto and Octo-Contra-Bass clarinets, the only time you'll ever get to hear them now are on the few YouTube videos where Cyril Mercator is playing the instrument. Unfortunately, they are going to be an interesting footnote in the history of woodwind instruments. As much as creative people like myself would love to get their hands on them, love to write for them, it's just not going to happen.